excited today for our keynote speaker. I've been trying to get him here for the last couple of years. Our keynote speaker comes to us from the Menominee tribe of Wisconsin. He grew up learning deep cultural teachings from the elders in his community. He went on to enter formal education, started off in aerospace engineering at the University of Minnesota, quickly came to his senses and went back to the woods. He was a logger for a while and then went into forestry, and he didn't really seem to connect much with that Western education. So he started throwing all of that out into the compost bin and went back to his cultural roots. And he does an amazing job of blending Western science with traditional ecological knowledge. And I know you can really enjoy his talk because it's all about the forest and the plants. Not only does he do that work, he's also a protector of archaeological sites. He goes out and identifies the sites where they are, does inventory work on them, works for preservation of these sites. And what is really fascinating to me is he relates the old teachings to what they find in the sites to help date them. I think that's just fantastic. So without further ado, please give Jeff Grignon a warm welcome, a warm stewardship welcome, our keynote speaker of 2019.
Also meet everybody. My name is Jeff Grignon. I'm from Menominee, Wisconsin. Pleasure to be here. Some of my background, my Menominee name is Pamampame, means seen going by. The elders through my lifetime have talked about I was destined to work with the ark sites. They relate it back to the spirits of the ark sites see me coming and know that I'm going to preserve those sites. So it's an honor to have that name. I'm also Wolf, Deer, and Dog Clan. Several years working for MTE and a lot of Western fire experience. Long ago, when I was young, probably age 4, my elders used to gather on Saturday nights. They'd come and relate stories, speak Menominee, and for some reason they must have knew what my future would be in forest regeneration. So they started a regimen of teaching of Menominee ecological knowledge at these get-togethers. One of the highlights of that teaching was understanding the environment, how to recognize what's going on in the environment, and seeing the structure and the overall picture of what's going on. A term they taught me was Napanopamechuan. That means flows repeatedly when looking at the environment. Now this is a different orientation than what you find in Western science, in the formal teachings. It's a way of looking at and understanding what's going on in the environment around you, whether it's humans, plants, animals. This photo up here, this is basically when you look at science, there's a term called self-similarity. Patterns built within nature, environment, basically the same meaning. In this picture you have a picture representing the neural network of our brain, the human brain. Comparing that pattern to the pattern of the root system is an example of that Napanopamechuan or self-similarity. You see it in the microscopic world, the very smallest to the very largest. You know, my aerospace engineering background, as limited as it is, one of my emphasis was cosmology, my interest. You see those patterns in the microscopic level all the way up through to the size of the universe and most likely beyond, to the multiverse. You also see it in the plants. It's a good way to grasp what's going on if you can see patterns, if you train yourself to look for patterns. These patterns can both be in the physical world, but also in the physiological actions of the human body, plant physiology. It also reaches into behaviors. You know, as a collective species, human behavior has patterns. Wall Street, trading on Wall Street have patterns. You know, you just got to train yourself to see those patterns. It gives you a good way to grasp what's going on. It's easier to learn also. Menominees also use that Knopenham or self-similarity patterns to understand that the weather also has patterns. A lot of our ancient garden beds, fire regime that was put into the garden beds was based on the 6-year weather cycle. I used that 6-year weather cycle to change my budget when I was working in forest development or forest regeneration. So keying to certain patterns in the weather, I could increase my budget for 1 year so that I could site prep areas for more planting or a seed fall. This is one of the famous drawings here. I use this with students to get them to recognize that when you view the environment, stop viewing it in the human orientation type of perception. We tend to associate things to a human perspective, but really the environment, as Knopenham says, it flows repeatedly. It flows repeatedly, it's interconnected. So there's no foreground. A lot of science talk about ecological niches where plants are in almost their own little space and the background is static and unchanging. That's not how the environment works. Some of the teachings that taught me that there's no foreground and background. It's all background. It's interconnected. Now if you take, say, the environment, a disturbance runs through the environment. It causes a plant to change its genetic structure. As soon as the plant changes, the environment changes. And it's a continual process back and forth. When the environment changes, the plant changes. When the plant changes, the environment changes. So it flows. It's a fluid environment. This next concept of understanding the forest or the prairies was taught to me by the elders. It's an elder plant concept, they call it. I've matched it up to some of the old stories that we have, the ancient stories, several thousand years old. They talk about basically what's termed as the Three Sisters Garden, our ancient garden beds. Now the old Menominees back then, they viewed what was going on in the gardens. Corn, beans, squash, or whatever other plants were growing within the garden area. They keyed in, they realized that the corn is the true elder. It's not the humans tending the garden, it's the corn that's the elder that controls that environment. We included it. We are just members of that community. Now, The elder corn controls what happens within the garden. It cares for the other plants, it nurtures them, and it provides a gift from the Creator for the human element. It's based off of what I was taught, deep-rooted plants. Deep-rooted plants can take on those elder characteristics because they step up and take on responsibilities for that community. They provide water for the other plants. And like I said, this is not only forest, but it's also prairie situations. This, elder communities, you have the elder plant, deep-rooted plant, basically in the center. You have different inner plants, outer plants around within that community. So you'd possibly have like a deep-rooted tree in the middle, shrubs, herbaceous plants, grasses. But these communities aren't just with the physical plants above ground. This extends below ground too, the microenvironment, the bacteria, viruses, the microbial community underground is also part of the community. You add animals. Animals are a part of that community. And if you're in the garden areas, humans are a part of that community. But at no point are the humans ever above the plants or the community. We're just members. Here's a depiction. The wigwam in the center representing the elder. You have the inner plants, the long-time residents of that community, and you have the outer edge plants. The outer edge plants come and go between communities. So, one of the elders gave me the advice to identify an elder plant community somewhere close to where I live, and to return to that community over the years. And it's been 48 years now I've been returning to that one single elder plant community. And he told me to observe what goes on over time. You know, even though 48 years might seem like a long time, it's nothing compared to the 600 million years these plants have been around. But it gives you a good snapshot of what goes on within these communities. You see these outer edge plants coming and going according to disturbances in the environment. They may leave this community and enter another community over the years. You see plants in the inner circles shift according to the weather patterns over years, over decades. They're all communicating. All these plants communicate with that elder. The elder communicates with the plants, the plant environments. Each community communicates. So there's a sharing going on. In my talk tomorrow, I'll try to explain better how that process works. Physiological process, and using humans as an example, and also plant physiology to describe how that communication goes on. Nomocomic wane skew, mycorrhizal fungi. Menominee meaning is the spirit that flows underground between the plants. That communication, there are different forms of communication between plants within these communities. One of them is below ground, the root systems, the neurological network of the plants below ground. There's communication through the mycelia and to the other plants. So that's one form of communication. There's other forms also, but according to Menominee, this is the sacred underground. It was so sacred that we would forego harvesting the fruiting mushrooms that appeared on the ground because we wanted to preserve that underground environment. And it's had a big influence on me in my regeneration efforts after schooling. When you think about it, the mycelia, they've been around for probably roughly 1.3 billion years. The plants have been around for 600 million years. So with that viewpoint, when I approach regenerating an area, I view the trees, the herbaceous plants, whatever I'm trying to grow, those are basically just fruiting bodies for the mycelia underground. So my orientation is below ground all the time. It's not what it's going to look like above ground, it's what's going to happen below ground. Typical forest, you'll have several elder plant communities. Each of these trees may represent an elder plant community. And remember, not every tree is an elder, just like humans. They have the knowledge and they have the willingness to sacrifice for that community. It's a big contrast between what I was taught in school. We base everything in forestry off of groups of trees or stands of trees. Here's the Menominee forest here. This elder plant concept is a really good way to key in on what's exactly happening within an area. Look at a stand of trees or a group of trees, you kind of get lost and overwhelmed what's going on. So I went through the formal education. I basically set that aside, went back to the cultural teachings when I started forest regeneration, and then slowly brought the science in to back up what I was doing with the forest. Here's a picture of an oak wilt gap. Oak wilt is basically a fungus that's transmitted into a damaged northern red oak tree. It migrates down to the root system. Being a pathogenic fungi, it starts basically choking off the water supply of the tree, the mycelia and the root systems, and affects another tree and another until it runs out of the root grafting. Now, I was given this project here at the Menominee Forestry, regenerate this area. So it was an excellent example of really bringing the Menominee cultural ecology into practical application. To fully get my feet wet, basically, to fully do it in a site. My first option for site prep always is fire, but with modern urban interface, that's becoming less likely. But what I've noticed is all the site prep techniques I do before I plant to prep the area, each one is trying to replicate what fire does on a lesser scale. So without the use of fire, I'm spending thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars preparing areas for planting where if I could just run fire through each and every site, I would, and be done with it. Because the benefits of fire is if you can get low intensity, multiple events of fire going through an area, is the best site prep you could ever have for northern red oak, white pine, just about any species, jack pine. The prairie situations, it's multiple low-intensity fire. And I've related that back because I recorded stories, Menominee elder stories over the years. I have stacks of stories that I've recorded word for word, and you can pick out the fire regime that Menominees used to use long ago. Just in these northern red oak areas, all the northern red oak stands on the reservation. If you lay down the archaeological work I do with the trail system, which I've tracked the trail system through the reservation in order to match up sites. If you lay the trail system down, you can see origin points of where they lit off the trails, lit the fires off the trails that originated the northern red oak areas. So very fire dependent. Herbicide is another option of site prep. I don't really recommend herbicide site prep. I used it the first 2 years. It was huge, wide swing. It was very expensive one year. It wasn't expensive the next year based on supply and demand throughout the world for the chemical that was used. The first year I used it, I spent probably $60,000 for site prep total. The next year was $120,000 for site prep. That's site prepping 800 acres roughly a year. Pretty expensive, hard to budget. And the effect, that's what I don't like is the effect. Because it's a pretty drastic effect on the plants. It'll set it back almost to the original successional stage. That's pretty drastic. With my site prep, I've found that it's better to use all the tools that you could use, different types of site prep, in order to target certain successional stages for the plants. So you're matching up the plants that come back naturally with what you're trying to grow tree-wise within the site. It's a pretty radical technique using the herbicide. So I turned to other means, an old technology, roller chopping. Less than a third of the cost of herbicide. Site prep, it aerates the soil, breaks down the weed debris. But the main thing is I can bring back, depending on the intensity that I do on the site, I can bring back different successional stages of plants that return on their own. Where there are certain types of successional stage in plants, you got the microenvironment below ground is matched. Like I said, I always look underground. I don't look at what's above ground. Now with our scheduling, normally with tree seedlings, you have a window between 1 to 3 to 4 years for the seedling to establish within the site. I got to thinking about that, cultural teachings, patterns that happen, and you got a 1 to 4 year window where the site is basically not being utilized as much as it should. So that spurred my thinking about, intensity of site prep. Why not do all these different types of site prep according to what the history of the site is, basically what the glacial activity that happened on the site. Why not vary your intensity? Use these different tools, bring back different successional stages. When you do that with the natural plants, you get different types of pollinator habitat. So, depending on the site, depending on the year, I have I have 800, roughly on average 800 acres of diversified pollinator habitat for 1 to 4 years before the tree seedlings establish and start taking control of their plant communities. It's a nice way to bring in the habitat, for the pollinators. We use roller chopping, as you see here. Barely ever use herbicide anymore. There's anchor chains where it's dragged across the surface of the ground. I've used the front blade on this machine for sites. For doing direct blading, I've rented the Wisconsin DNR bulldozers, use dozing. Whatever tool you can use in your toolbox, and in varying the degree of intensity. Roller chop site, woody debris broken up, aeration of the soil. You get the natural, native, whatever successional stage the plants are in will come right back the next year. Elegant ways to site prep. A couple of the sites here, which I'm going to describe up here in the upcoming slides. I just happened to be reading Robin Kimmerer's book because we had done some kind of free-form teaching in front of students where we just have kind of a goal and we just go back and forth, with our teaching. I'll add something to what she added and she adds something to what I added. It was a pretty interesting time. So I picked up her book, read the book, Natural History of Mosses, and noticed when I went out to some of the Oakwood sites, the site prep was a little more intense than what I would like to have had in those sites. I seen moss covering the sites when it was time to start planning on the planting portion. So, to great concern of my supervisors, I set these sites aside for a year to come back and see what happens with the mosses. I didn't want really intense site prepping on the site. The mosses were telling me, maybe you should hold off for a year. I had a lot of arguments and concern with my supervisors because everybody's so schedule-wise. We're tied to our schedules. But got the okay, set the sites aside, came back again. And lo and behold, most of the moss was gone across the surface that had been site prepped with a blade. So I was ready to be able to plant. So it's a good example of listening and seeing what's happening with the forest. Let it guide what you're going to do. I go by the motto my elders taught. You bust your tail to get to the point where you want to go in the direction, but then right before you get there, stop, slow down, and let it come to you. That way you're not forcing something. It's never done me wrong to do that. That way you can weigh your options. You can go in what different directions once you're at that point. In the site, chance to put in some more diversity within the northern red oak sites. Some climate hardy species, bur oak, white oak, drought resistant. Again, the drought resistance for the bur oak and white oak is because of the underground environment, the mycelia environment. Certain types of fungi give it that drought resistance. Sumac, these were the bur oak and white oak were seedlings that were grown in our small greenhouse and planted on site. Everything else in here was direct seeded, because I was after trying to get the cheapest way to recreate an elder plant community. So all these other species are directly seeded from seed that was harvested off the reservation. But I put in this particular site, Site 7, we have probably about 18 different plant communities for bur oak, white oak. I have plant communities for upland, lowland, different species of herbaceous plants. But you got sumac, it's a good antiviral. You got vacciniums, hemlock panicgrass. It's a good disinfectant. Now, my elders taught that what's good medicinally for a human is also good medicinally for the land or the other plants. So, being that it's a good disinfectant for humans, it's good for the area that's being planted. You got wintergreen, it's a good winter tonic. It's active through the winter. Remember that sharing of, what science would call chemicals, but it's also what we call medicines are shared within those plant communities. You got secondary or non-featured trees within the site. I reached one zone down to add shagbark hickory and chinkapin oak, just to kind of like a canary in the coal mine. These particular species start becoming active and start seeding and start really showing good growth. That means that the weather and the environment is changing within that site. I included red maple because of it's one of the species, one of the many species that contain dimethyltryptamine. I'll get into that a little bit more towards the back, some of the chemistry. Plant the inner species of seedling and then direct seed outward, circular fashion. Because in our native beliefs and observations of the environment, everything tends to want to be a circle out there. You don't see the square edges that we see in rooms in these human buildings. So, within the oak wood gap, usually 1 acre to 2 acres in size, you'd have multiple communities planted within there, with the seedling in the middle and the outer edge inner plants and outer edge plants direct seeded into different communities. I've had the best growth for red oak seedlings in all my plantations, or planted sites. Usually when I plant just northern red oak, it will establish itself, but it'll stay basically the same size. It will just exist within the site. So then I have to get a hold of the fire program, have them come in and to burn these oak plantations in order to get them to sprout and get them past that initial stage growth. But in these oak wood sites, by carefully planning these communities in a low-cost way, I was able to jumpstart the growth. Now this oak species here, it was grown 1 year in our greenhouse, taken out, outplanted on the site, and it's 1 more year of growth. So we're roughly above 30 inches here, almost 32-inch growth, just by, I believe, adding these plant communities, direct seeding. Like I said, I look at everything below ground. I don't fixate on what the above ground is going to look like. phenomenal growth. I added grasses in a lot of the sites. Reason is, when I was told to observe those elder plant communities, I could watch these patches of grass within the elder plant community that I've watched for over 40 years. These small grass areas move around within the community. You don't stay in one spot and get overtopped. It moves to different spots. Researching what grass does is, it's really a spot regeneration of soil area within the communities. So if you see a plant community around a tree with a lot of grass, there's a lot of regeneration of the soil going on. So I definitely want to include that. Researching, the fungi environment below ground, I come out to the psilocybin as a deep connection with grass. It basically creates a sudden growth in the root system of the grasses. That sudden growth of a section of the root system eventually sloughs off the roots and dies. That's kind of what the grasses do. They'll slough off that excess growth, let it die, and let it go by the wayside, and the psilocybin will help that dead root grass. It'll basically create a mulch underground, which will regenerate the soil in that spot. Now, psilocybin, for all of you that have read about the 1960s, psilocybin and DMT are both psychotropic chemicals, combination. So, basing my research off of that, I researched the physiology of the plants, and basically what that does is it encourages growth in the neurological network of the root systems of not only the grasses but the plants within the vicinity of the site, within the community. You grow the neurological sections of the roots, you increase communication within the community. You open it up. I've studied about that physiology of the plants, that I'm trying to aid in the communication, trying to get the free flow communication going within these elder plant communities. With the use of that psilocybin, placing grass in certain areas within the communities where I've seen where there's sections of site prep that my machines have done that are a little more intense than I want, I'll place the grass seed there to generate that section of the community. Psilocybin is basically, the activities of the fungi. DMT or dimethyltryptamine are the actions that happen in the vascular plants. They both aid in neurological networks within the plant's physiology. Basically, picture I use blackberries and raspberries within this particular site because the animal traffic, basically the deer trails that come through the site after the site prep was completed, I was able to redirect the direction the deer take using the blackberry and raspberry bushes. They're also antibacterial and antiviral for the community. So. This is a little statement that I put on all my projects or presentations. You know, the main part of it is programs will be rooted in indigenous plant science, tribal needs, and weave in scientific tools guided by indigenous wisdom. I really believe that we have to come to terms. Cultural teachings have a lot to offer science, and science has a lot to offer the cultural teachings. So it's been a goal of all my projects. My new project is greenhouse, start networking greenhouses, but bringing that cultural knowledge together with science, it's almost imperative that we do that for our future. Depending too much on Western science is not a good thing. Depending too much on the cultural knowledge is not a good thing. They need to come together equally, come to the table, well, partners, in order for us to get to the next level. Because at my cultural teachings, we identify dreams. I had a dream once, not too long ago. I was dreaming about a 2-year-old child inside of a square room, such as this. There were plants lining the room, and this little 2-year-old child was thrashing about like 2-year-olds do. And I didn't focus in the dream on the 2-year-old child. I focused on what the plants were feeling along the edges here. And it was the feeling that a grandparent feels when their 2-year-old grandson is throwing things around and thrashing about, you know. Taking that perspective of the plants. A lot of what the cultural teachings are. You know, getting out of that human orientation, the way we tend to view things through the human lens. That's what cultural teachings can bring to the table with science. A viewpoint of what's going on in the environment, that thinning of self and other, you know, background, foreground, that sort of thing. So I think it's imperative that they both come together so that we as a species can reach that age 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. That's kind of the basis of the driving motivation for my programs. So that's about all I have for today.